Hey Juan, how you doing?
How are you?
Good, good.
Okay. That was just to explain how it works. So you are now recording? No.
There you go. So Nacho's explaining the structure. We're going to do two short presentations and stop,
Yeah.
and then continue with those talks.
Yeah.
Okay, so I have a break that is a bit past 10 minutes probably. That's Nacho.
I think
because
it's always permanent. So.
all right.
Okay, hello everyone. This is working, yes. Welcome to this first transfer dialogue, which is starting the series of 10 sessions we'll have along the semester. This is just a welcome and an expression of gratitude to all the people who has helped us to make possible this first session, which always is difficult to start this new things in the program of the school, because the transfer dialogues try to be a collection of conversations related to to make visible what's happening in all the studios of the school working at the same time. We thought that it was a good idea to start having a session dedicated precisely to the transfer from another disciplines, and that's because we have organized this panel of today, which is, I think, quite related to the first steps of the projects you are doing in your studios, that perhaps now you are searching and looking for information from different fields and trying to bring this data to your work and transform it. Some information from different specialities and expertises and fields into useful raw materials for your projects. No? So, welcome everybody. Ignacio González Galán and Diana Martinez will be the introductors and coordinators of this session. We'll have two persons every day doing this, so they have to take the floor and start working right now. Thank you very much. And Ignacio with you.
Okay. So my name is Ignacio Galán, and I'm going to briefly introduce our speakers and moderate the discussion together with Diana Martinez. Diana first with her entered Columbia as an AAD student, so she was sitting where you are today not so long ago, and she is now a PhD candidate at the school where she's currently teaching in the AAR program, the ARPA program. I'm very grateful that she has agreed to join the discussion, as I think she's one of the most eloquent voices in the school. If the Transfer Dialogue series aims to build a platform to share the ways in which we position ourselves as a school and the kind of culture we are building in studios, with a series of conversations among instructors and students, we want this first session to look not at the languages and procedures that we necessarily have as our own, which will mostly concern us in the series, but at the ways in which we introduce in our dialogues transfers from other fields of knowledge, we borrow tools from other forms of practice, we share conversations with other disciplines, and we depend on professions outside our own. So before I start introducing the speakers, let me say that all of them have been so widely awarded, published, and exhibited that I will skip for the most part the list of venues and publications to make this intro manageable. First of all, we will have Ben Aranda, principal of Aranda Lash, who is back at the school after having studied and taught here not long ago. The early works of his practice were published in the book Tooling and now expand from Miami to Gabon and range in scale from furniture experiments to large governmental complexes. Since 2003, their work stands out as having sought to introduce in our design protocols procedures derived from the technical operations of computation with their related aesthetic regimes and formal languages in ways that he describes as destructive in a good way. Though the logics of computation are now naturalized within our discipline, we might here want to do the critical exercise of remembering that it's not so long ago that the computer was introduced in our studios in order to inspect the work he will show as a dialogue with this hitherto foreign tool and consequently explore the potentials it offers for architecture, in his word, as promise of renewal. Hilary Sample will be the second speaker. She is an associate professor at the school, so she barely needs an introduction. Her firm with Michael Meredith, MOS, similarly started with design experiments at small scale or in the scaleless realm of the digital, but they currently have commissions all over, some of which are included in their recent book, Everything All at Once. Though the work of their office is also actively engaged in the potential of computation, rather than necessarily destructive, it becomes a mechanism to build in a very conscious way on disciplinary concerns and in a long-standing conversation of architecture with the arts, where problems concerning the relationships between part to whole, shape and form, or questions of equilibrium have resonances with the development of non-compositional practices in the second half of the century, and the use they make of computation becomes an ultimate exploration within architecture of problems set out within these practices. Her own scholarship has intersected with other realms of knowledge, including the health sciences, and has entered into productive dialogues with an increasing number of actors and interested parties articulated around questions of housing in projects like the one developed for the foreclosed exhibition at MoMA. Mark Washuta will be third. He's also a key figure in the school, where he is the director of exhibitions and co-director of the CCCP program. He has published widely and has created exhibitions in major venues, but has also situated the Arthur Ross Gallery in our neighbor building as one of the leading spaces for architecture exhibitions in the country. Though curating is itself a platform for dialogues and collaborations that he will explore today, most of his projects have explored the fringes of architecture, which are simultaneously blurred and shaped through different types of intersections and appropriations, shifting from art to increasingly intangible environments defined by chemicals and dissolved in air, among others. Finally, Juan Herreros will be the fourth speaker. He's also well known at the school, where he's a professor in practice, as well as this semester's director of advanced studios and coordinator of this very series. And he's at the same time a chair professor in the School of Madrid. He has a long career as an architect, first in partnership with Iñaki Ábalos, and since 2018, Herreros Arquitectos, now Studio Herreros, a practice based in Madrid but operating globally with works in Oslo, Bogota, Panama, among others. Since the beginning of his work and scholarship, he has explored the intersections of architecture with other experts and professionals, most importantly in the realms of the building industry and management. And while he has explored those dialogues historically in some of his publications, today he will be unfolding those around examples of his practice. So the format will consist on a first round of interventions that will lead to a first discussion, and we will consequently try to advance some of the arguments we might explore in this first section, with a second round of interventions of some of the speakers. Not all of them have managed to divide the talk in two, but some of them have, so we will have this double format. And then after those second round of intervention, we will continue the discussion. The idea is that the presentations thus will become more entangled with the arguments we might want to be discussing. So without further ado, Ben is going to start.
Thanks, Ignacio, and thank you, Juan. This is really exciting to be here. Just got to unlock my phone. And, well, I should say, I mean, I'm sure we're going to get down and take the gloves off, but I'm huge fans of everybody that's presenting today, so it's a real pleasure to do this. Let me open my presentation. So I'm going to talk today about it's called Computation and Ruin. It's a way that we have been trying to understand our work by looking back. One thing that is not entirely obvious to us about our projects over the past 10 years even is that it's not so much about patterns or math or science or assembly, but rather history drives a lot of the projects and the way that they're conceived. And more specifically, there's a certain obsession we have with historical objects as a way to move forward, but also, a way of reaching back. So a quick overview of our projects is that in the realm of design, history itself can be generative. In this project, which was the Grotto, it was a formative project for the office about how to make a fake cave. And really, what we were trying to do was, siphon all of the lost enchantments of the Grotto from the Victorian era through our own obsession of making boulders. And the idea was not really to, to develop like a particular system for building, but rather for unlocking the potential that we saw in this like highly charged landscape device from the 18th century. Or here, a similar way, a historical object. This is a chair called 1774. And the year 1774 was the year when Louis XV died, and also when it was the year when the element manganese was discovered. So this object was not really about anything more than building a moment in time. Or if it's not a direct time in history, sometimes our work is about building things that continue a narrative. And some of the greatest storytellers are scientists. Here, Daniel Shechtman, who 2 years ago won the Nobel Prize in Chemistry, proves in this moment of this photograph that there's the impossibility of quasicrystals can in fact exist in nature, and he's demonstrating with an icosahedral model how you can make quasicrystals in the lab. And what's on the desk here actually is a photograph, a famous photograph of an instant that they were able to make quasicrystals in 1984 in the lab. And he's proving here that and part of the brilliance of the icosahedral model that he developed was that it was just made of two simple shapes. So, his search is for the endless through simplicity, and we took that on as a way to make furniture. But it was surprising that this non-repetitive pattern goes even further back in science to what was discovered maybe 5 years ago on a nave in Iran, a quasi-crystalline pattern. And it's about this narrative. I mean, for us, this discovery was yet another moment in this narrative where these this search for some sort of embodiment of the infinite continues in different ways. And many of our efforts in the studio has been about making these universal stories very, very specific and even mundane, and how we can tell these sort of cosmic stories through things as mundane as a table. Or here, this is Wilson Bentley, not a scientist, but a farmer who proved with his simple camera, shown here, that indeed no two snowflakes are alike. And he photographed over 6,000 snowflakes in his lifetime, and he died of pneumonia from spending so much time out there in the cold. And we developed this project that's called Rules of Six, and it was an ode to Wilson Bentley, who's so inspiring to us. And we made basically an information system that had a driving rule of six, and it's called the rule of six because it was an ode to this farmer who asked, what magic is there in the rule of six that makes the snowflake conform so rigidly to its laws? He was searching for this magic, and he never found it. Or here, the artist, Matthew Ritchie, who we've been collaborating with for some time, who asked, he always wants to tell the story of the whole universe in every single piece of his works. And he asked us to tell the story of the universe through one part of it. So it was the commission was to build a cyclical universe where each part of it has every other part possible within it. So it's a fractal story built by a fractal, which would change and reorganize depending on its city. So the drawing informs the construction and reconstruction of this installation, and the drawing also informs you how to build it. So it's almost a kind of self-assembly. Or here, this is a new building in Miami being built now for the fashion brand Tom Ford. And for us, we wanted to tap into Art Deco, which Miami is so well recognized for their amazing storied architectural past. So our version is a textured concrete facade that ripples sort of over the facade and down to the street, and it's our way to connect back to the city's past, to some era of decadence and ornament, but this time with a kind of systemic rhythm. Or here even, this is a competition that we won a couple years ago in Gabon for a civic space, where instead of making a new building, we proposed to rebuild the ruins of an old theater that was on this site. And the reason we won the competition is we proposed to build an outdoor theater on the ruins of an old theater that was there. So we kept the existing theater that you see here, relined it, and then built a canopy over it. And the building is it mirrors our obsession with simple parts, singular parts. So this one's made out of a strip of aluminum an extruded single aluminum strip that forms a stress skin that uses local hardwoods. But it's a building system with only one part. So instead of the usual hierarchy of building elements like columns, beams, joists, etc., it's made from a simple extruded element which can be cut and formed and eventually formulates a kind of meshwork capable of surprising spans and relative thinness of depth. Or here in this project where we multiplied Olmsted's bridges in Central Park. So we use the bridges as this historical device to make new connections in Central Park. And you can see all the different versions that we made. And it all comes together in this image in a way, and I ask you to kind of just consider this. We have the quasi-crystal, the fractal, the single building element, and the historical object all in this image. All of those projects beforehand are all in here. And when we look at this, we sort of have to force some questions on ourselves, like what good is computation when it leaves you something so atomized, so frayed, and so admittedly difficult? What is it about computation that compels us towards entropy? How did computation get us here? And why is it time and time again that when we start a project and even if it's of uses historical significant objects as a starting point, we end up with this pile of ruin? So this is like a question we're always asking ourselves and challenging ourselves. And our position is this: like, we believe computation is destructive to the discipline of architecture in a good way, that it breaks things down into parts, and it breaks things down into this binary language of composition and recomposition. So imagine sand, and all of our projects kind of somehow we always take this position that it is like sand, that it can be recuperated or reformed. And architecture has responded in every conceivable way to this breakdown. The discipline itself is like a sandcastle, hit by waves on a shore. This stable thing we call architecture really is trying to control its dissolve through things like science, parametrics, and algorithms. We have so many in the field fascinated by technologies of assembly and numerical control. It's hard to deny a strange dual obsession we have with the way things come together and the way they fall apart. We remained fixed by what I would call the tower and the ruin. But architecture has been here before. Architecture has learned before in other times of history that the ruin is a soft foundation upon which to move forward, upon which to build a future. Here, the future is a ruin in this painting by Gustave Doré. It's called The New Zealander, and it's a sketch of an architect sitting down, and he's sketching the ruins of London. So it's called The New Zealander because he's from New Zealand. He's from the New Territories. So, and it's the idea that the glorious remains of London would be an inspiration to a new colonist. So precisely at the dawn of the Industrial Revolution, radical architects like John Soane demonstrate in remarkable and imaginative ways how their work is both tower and ruin. Here is a design for the Bank of England, and it's shown in a state of decay. But it's actually just a kind of novel way that Soane uses of developing a cut section. And Piranesi, who formed vital new structures from fragments of previous civilization, Piranesi was an inspiration to Soane. He conjured up these wild new possibilities from the rocks he found in the ruins of Roman Pompeii. And these drawings of ruins produced buildings that once existed, but also led to breakthrough contemporary projects. And it's how these early studies of ruination became a system of formation, and how they helped architects rescue the discipline from an overbearing classicism. I think that's the lesson that we can take from these ruins, as we as architects now are dealing with certain overbearing isms in their profession. The architect then, on a grand tour, you can see climbing up, measuring a ruin. And, architects now, there are differences, but there are also similarities. In other words, computation did to the physical world what time did to ruins. The ruin was a freedom to rebuild, and computation is giving us the same. This is the drawing from Henry Labrouste that started this whole line of inquiry. It's called The Imaginary Reconstitution of an Ancient City. And you have to wonder, when you look at this image, how Labrouste imagined this reconstitution from the rubble. Or to put it another way, how did the ruin know how to rebuild itself? How did the imagination of the architect know how to make the ruin live again? Is it the matter of the brick, or is it some other property? And just in a quick conclusion, now matter is learning how to reorganize itself, and material science is radically transforming our lives. So the battery in your cell phone, the computer that you use, all of these advances are being made possible because of reinvention of materials at a granular level. And this reinvention of materials is the basis for which our culture is transforming. So as humankind defines itself by these properties of civilization, like we were in the Stone Age once, we were in the Bronze Age, we were in the Industrial Age, and more recently in the Silicon Age. Well, the Silicon Age is pretty much ending, and everybody talks about the age that we're going into as the Nano Age. And this is the age of molecular control, where bottom-up rules of formation govern materials and all kind of bottom-up rules of formation. So material scientist has understood self-assembly, and I want to conclude with a cascade of images from architects like Moss. We have the very many, Skylar Tibbetts and Gramazio Kohler, and just conclude with this, that we are not makers, we are ruiners, that there's nothing inherent or transcendental about computation or algorithms. For architecture, we can use them all, but instead what is needed now is to consider how computation undermines our stable view of the world. The ruiners don't use computers to advance or move forward, but rather disrupt our ideas of what a thing should be in the first place. Thank you.
Okay. I hope you can hear me. Sorry, I have a cold. Thank you. I agree, Juan and Ignacio, for the introduction. It is very exciting to be part of the first transfer dialogues, and in just hearing Ben's talk, I, in a way, wish instead of 2 parts today, we could come back next week and respond again or something. But It's interesting. Ben, I just want to get to the conversation part, honestly. But I would agree. It was great to hear your presentation. And I think you said two things that were very interesting in terms of the kind of specifics. And of course, Michael and I admire you and Chris's work a lot. Certainly we've looked at it and have been inspired by it, particularly I'd say the SAND project. And thank you for showing our work too in it. And there's nothing mundane about it. Sorry, you can't hear me? Am I mumbling? How about is this better? Sorry, it's somehow not quite. I need a shorter desk or something. Anyway, I'm just saying that it's great to and very difficult to follow Ben. Also, I have to say, and how much we admire the work, and I think it's been an inspiration in many ways too to us. It's interesting to see again, the images presented and think about the work in a way that, as you described, is kind of specific. I think also, and you also said fit, which I think for us our work is more loose. So, and your work is very elegant. I hope ours is too, but it's somehow different. So I don't know. So anyway, just to say that I think I have a series of notes I've written. A week is not a lot of time to get ready for this kind of thing. So in the context of school starting and everything else. But I hope that this somewhat relates to Ben's talk, but that we've been interested in this space that oscillates between realism and representation at new frequencies perhaps, always working with this relationship of art and life together, not separate. And in terms of working using video game physics through processing apps that are built around non-compositional art tactics, scatters, crumples, piles, droops, weak forms, etc. Also making videos that try to mix data with stories, including ourselves sometimes as fictional characters. Don't try to guess who they are. But producing a space where we can think about architecture and its relationship to life. Computation and data definitely occupy this space for many of us nowadays. We almost don't think of data as representation with all of its errors and subjectivities, but we think of it more as an objective space when it isn't. Speaking of data, I forgot to start the stopwatch. I have to do that right now. Any case. Anyway, so mapping and data, and we are all tracking each other. If anything, I think this is a sort of generational shift where we are absorbed in a greater collapse than previous generations. And it seems to only be increasing for students today. I think one of the things that I wrote in the preface to our book, Everything All at Once, which I have to say I came out right after, or right at the time that I had my two children. So I've never really had an opportunity to talk about that book or present any of the writings from it. But in some of the text from it, it's a very short preface to the book, but saying that today there are new combinations of histories and disciplines accessible to students and architects which were not available to previous generations. Architects can work as they always have, as generalists and alchemists, but are now compelled to work with more ingredients, expanded fields of information, and new modes of representation. And this is seemingly only more increasing more and more things coming into architecture. The recent years have seen an interesting response in the profession by trying to evacuate architecture into a minimalist cloud of white, think Santa, which makes architecture more easily able to absorb life and contingency. We have been thinking about the generic or vernacular. Simultaneously, I've been focusing on a subject like health, but this is just one of many pressures on architecture and cities today. In the middle of this collapse of influences and contingencies in architecture, I want to make sure people don't think of it as merely an academic exercise, where it's seen as simply aesthetic, a new Jenks ad hocism, or postmodernism 2.0. We are interested in aesthetics as politics, think of Rancière, but really we're architects still concerned with making the world better in a small way. And I think, for instance, Ben Lerner's new novel, 10:04, does a good job of explaining the space we are working within, something where fictional narratives, art, representation, social media, realism, our human condition, etc., seem to get intertwined at seemingly new levels, or at least in ways that feel different to me. I want to read one more thing that I have been working on, and I think, thinking about being in school, and of course this is the context of our setting today, but if we, and I'm speaking for myself and for Michael, my partner in the office, Michael Meredith, we were taught to dismantle things, to take buildings apart piece by piece in order to look at their makeup. Our saws, screwdrivers, and sledgehammers were made of formal analysis, cultural criticism, theory, diagrams, filmic techniques, animation, process, the disciplinary narratives of the neo-avant-garde. Our teachers were master technicians in instability, doubt, and meaningless. Nothing seemed as important as nothing. Solidity was to be challenged, ground was to be displaced, structure and gravity wasn't on the radar. Building codes were too boring to be bothered with. Familiarity needed to be defamiliarized. The vernacular wasn't considered architecture, just banal buildings. Architecture, like art, was a problem of overcoming that horror of individual will and expressionism. So we were taught to make machines, to elude ourselves through inhuman techniques, systems, etc. Never say I. Always use the third person. Don't take criticism personally. Don't try to solve problems. Don't try to solve social problems. They are not problems of architects. Use the term void whenever possible. Architecture is a history of representation, of abstraction through mediums, think perspective, orthographic projection, i.e. plans, axonometry, collage, digital models. Don't think about architecture through craft or physicality or the base materialism of buildings. They're vocational issues, not disciplinary or conceptual problems. Avoid commerce, so on and so on. We were seduced by these academic games of negation and love playing amongst the ruins, but eventually it seemed that our problem was the exact opposite of our teachers, to collect and gather the leftovers from the neo-avant-garde and attempt to weld them back together to engage the world, the real, gravity, craft, economy, commerce, data, the vernacular, or generic buildings, was still acknowledging the discipline's history. When we started our office, there was no need to further dismantle architecture. We felt as though we were tasked to reconstruct it, fabricate an architecture again through collected fragments within a diffuse field of dead ends. Okay, so all of that to say that the transdisciplinary global practice and appropriation. I'm just going to go through a couple projects. This is the Krabbesholm Artist Studio in Skive, Denmark. This is a series of 4 studios that were made in a total of 2 years from the time we had our first face-to-face meeting with the client till the project was done. It was very fast. We were asked to figure out a way to bring together these different art practices that were happening. This is for a school for students who between high school and college and decide what they're going to actually study. And so how to bring together art, graphic design, photography, architecture. 60% of Denmark's students in architecture, with the exception of Bjarke, have gone through this school. Not our building, but the institution. And so how to bring together these disciplines. So one way for us was to think about how the studios could look onto each other and really, in a way, kind of collapse the relationship between them. We were asked not to produce drawings to present to the city, but to present a list of materials that the project could be, which was very strange in that we were also working on a project, a renovation of a historic opera house near New Haven, Connecticut, and all they wanted to see were renderings. So it was a really, really weird experience. And from there, we just kept building up and further defining the limits of what the materials would be. We're very interested in roofs and forms, obviously, vernacular forms. So roof, in this case, the shape. During construction, they found an old courtyard, and so we thought the project was completely dead, but they just came and took pictures and covered it back up and kept building. We worked on the structure with Hanif Kara from AKT. Quickly framing it. Snow. Idea that the work could be done outside as much as inside and try to create social space Foreclosed is a project that we were invited to participate in. I'm sure many of you are familiar with this project for the MoMA Foreclosed Buell project to look at Orange, New Jersey, which has a kind of large rate, not necessarily a foreclosure, but a kind of post-industrial abandon and density at the level of Manhattan. So we took advantage of this idea using a kind of four-story, very narrow, incremental idea for a plan, almost like a kind of brownstone, rethinking ideas of building codes in this case and zoning. So anything that is pink was live and white was work, using software as a way to help us in the design. These models were all made by hand, no laser cutter. And anyway, here we are. This project also was about, has layers of health embedded in it, from why the only 4 stories, why it's only so wide. We worked with social psychologists, we worked with economics advisors. Collapsing ideas of real and the representational is also something we're very interested in. As I've said, this is an orphanage located in Kathmandu that's under construction. And in terms of issues of health, there's many of these, but how to create a place for children who are called orphans. They may or may not be, actually, is a whole other sort of conversation to have, but how to build in a place that has limited materials, limited expertise and knowledge of building. A client that is a single person who wanted to do this and is paying for it himself. Pretty extraordinary. No building codes, except there are seismic codes. So this is completely built to a very intense structure in the event of a seismic event. Anything else we had to kind of make up, which is pretty scary to think about that. So we used building codes, IBC, and various other ones to try to get close to something. This is ground floor is a library. There are very few. There's only 7 libraries in all of Nepal, apparently, and so this can function as that, to think about education, ways in which global learning works, virtual learning and connections. That the whole place also is about all of the kind of sustainable systems. It's going to grow its own food. I mean, it has all of the purifying water, water collection, biogas, you name it. It's kind of in there. We're trying it. Models, construction. And then, of course, I have to say, kind of, again, to talk about Ben's work, but we're doing a project also in Miami. Ben and Chris, they're doing something on top of our building that they have kept hidden. I don't know. I think it has caused us to redo our facade, maybe a little bit, But in this case, we, I think going back to the issue of software and sort of along with the built projects, we've done a lot of temporary work and little projects for ourselves. We've also, in doing the movies and the software, we have projects that we just do for fun, and then they sort of stop, and then we go back to them and we think, how can we use them again or recuperate them? In this case, for a facade for also for the Miami Design District. We don't necessarily have a client yet for our project. In this case, there were very serious rules, both in terms of hurricane, but also signage, which has been rather difficult, I have to say. But a stone facade, but basically using a kind of software and thinking about gravity and sort of form finding through these kinds of many experiments and sort of jumbles and falling, and honestly things we just kind of like. Also experimenting throughout all the drawings. We have been recently redoing all of our drawings. And then maybe I'll stop here for the next part. Thank you.
trying to do the same thing. Hey, thanks everyone, and thanks Ignacio and Juan for setting this up, and super fun to talk with such brilliant colleagues. I'm going to talk around the problem of art and architecture fairly specifically through a set of projects that we've worked on recently. I'm going to make some prefatory comments and then scrub through those projects, and if the timing works out, I'll stop and then return through a different set of projects. Last year there was a conference at Yale on exhibitions in architecture, and I presented a talk on the well-known Pepsi Pavilion by the group Experiments in Art and Technology. Dean Stern asked me why I would waste my time talking about a group such as EAT that was representative of a body of practitioners against which he and his colleagues had formed the counter-revolution, as he described it, in the 1970s. And so we can read his statement as an expression of an architectural xenophobia positioned against the forms of experimentation and expansion of the field during the 60s and 70s, or perhaps more generously, as a demonstration of architecture's discursivity, that it is a perpetual debate about what the practice is, what the field is, what its intellectual where its formal coordinates lie, and where its boundaries are. And since we're talking about art and architecture here today, I think it's important to stress that art is equally discursive. These are not monolithic terms or fields, art and architecture. They fracture and divide. And so there is no relationship between art and architecture. There are singular acts of collaboration or appropriation that test and instantiate that relationship and their discursive disciplinary boundaries. So if any of you pay attention to some of the recent debates on curating and exhibitions, you're going to hear a version of this claim, which is that the most important yet least examined history of the last half of the 20th century is one formed not of artworks, but of exhibitions. It's a claim that challenges the singular status of objects, projects, and the narrative of their centrality. And even further, a journal like The Exhibitionist claims that the identity, position, and status of the auteur, borrowed from the pages of the Cahiers de Cinema, applies to curators in the post-war as convincingly as it did to filmmakers. The curator appears then not only as researcher, creative organizer, intellectual protagonist, but further as a figure responsible for authoring. And this is not my argument, theirs, the most consequential forms of production of the last half-century. So this invocation of authors and auteurs opens up the theoretical reassessment of authorial death and authorial ontology. What is an author? This claim of authorship is contested by a response that resists the possibility of the exhibition assuming more importance in the works of art, and that envisions a nightmare of the artist disappearing into the matrix of the aesthetic information that the exhibition organizes. So while this debate reveals some of the stakes at play in the age of massive global orchestration of exhibition events, it is unclear how directly it maps onto architecture. If we struggle to locate the same anxiety or uncertainties for architectural exhibitions, it is in part because the staging of history of modernism and architecture of the 20th century is already so firmly anchored to exhibitions, the International Style Show, the architecture of the École des Beaux-Arts, the 1968 Triennale. Their position, in fact, may be all too foundational in the conventional history of the field. A better question might be, how do we trouble this lineage? So I don't want to suggest that architectural exhibitions don't embody a potential disruptive threat. They're both the site of disciplinary consolidation and erosion, the site of internal museological reification, and the place of contamination. In Arthur Drexler's well-known reading, exhibitions are one form of one form of evidence of a second order of history, a history through which the architectural discursive imaginary is most lucidly articulated, and through which the presumed primacy of building may be displaced. and moreover through quite literal spatial adjacencies within museums and through institutions such as New York's downtown galleries of the 1980s, exhibitions open architecture to its myriad outsides and become sites of constructive, promiscuous absorption. So exhibitions in this model appear unstable, destabilizing, maybe not exactly ruining, but in that line, and not only because they're contaminating, but because they oscillate between the consolidation of myths, their narratives, and their undoing. And so with all of those troubles in mind, the boundaries between disciplines, art and architecture, what circulates through them, I just want to point to a series of projects, a couple that are done here, that we've done here at the gallery, and a couple outside that work on some of those frictions. And all of these projects have been done with various collaborators, but in every case they've been done as a collaboration with Adam Bandler. Our two auteurs, Jean-Luc Godard and Hans Ulrich. The first I'm going to just cite very quickly is an exhibition that we did with historian Brandon Joseph called UFOs and Effigies, Tony Orsler, UFOs and Effigies. And it looked at two sets of images drawn from Orsler's extensive photographic archives. And the exhibition in general, looking at photographic histories of UFOs and effigies, raised the question of the rhetoric of the photographic image. And it asked questions about the realism of the hot effigy photos and the cool objectivity of the UFO photography, and how they seem to occupy competing and symmetrical evidentiary positions. Each set strains against the outer edges of truth claims that were culturally invested in photography. And so here it's a curious analogy for us between something that is seemingly very distant, UFOs from architecture, but this entire question of how representation is invested with truth claims and evidence is clearly one that is in clear dialogue with architecture's contemporary preoccupations as seen through something like the Forensic Architecture Project. So here, let's say art is working as a kind of frictional analog. Another exhibition, which was a collaboration with an artist, was a show called No Longer Art, the Salvage Art Institute, with the artist Elka Krajewska, in which we were looking at this peculiar condition of art that has been damaged and declared a total loss object. And one of the strange conditions of these total loss objects is that they cannot circulate within the museum world, within the art market, within the gallery system. They're declared officially devoid of value. And in a sense, they no longer exist as art. So there's a signing into their non-art identity at the moment in which they're claimed total loss. And yet these objects persist in their damaged state. Here we have a damaged mini Jeff Koons. And so the exhibition examined these objects in their valueless state and tried to examine the various regimes of value that seemingly reattach themselves to these objects. And the exhibition, in part, tried to understand how we could suspend the magnetic attraction between the objects and the value that will reattach to them. And again, a kind of analog project for architecture, because all of these questions of value, ruination, destruction, and where architecture participates in this, especially in relationship to market forces, is something that the exhibition reflected on. But to look at frictions maybe slightly more directly, this is a project that was a collaboration with Felicity Scott and the artist Marco Fusinato at this year's Venice Biennale. It's an installation that consists of 2 speakers, 2 monitors, and overhead motion detector. And on the screens are images drawn from 2 sets of archives. One, the Centri Sociali, which were the sites of autonomous social organization in Italy in the 70s and 80s, which was the home of the radical punk movement in Italy. And on the other screen, images from a famous nightclub in Torino, designed by Piero de Rossi, called La Fana del Mondo. And so the project, I'm not going to describe the project completely, but it tried to look at the difference between those 2 structures of nightlife and sociability on either side of the divide of the intense political fulcrum of Italy in the 1970s. But what I want to point to is, in the installation, there is a motion detector above, and as you walk through the monitors, you trip the motion detector, and a viewer would be assaulted by an incredibly high decibel soundtrack with tracks taken from the 60s and from the 90s. And it was necessary for the project that the sound be loud enough that you could not hear yourself speak, to momentarily immerse you within the acoustic space of one of those clubs. But the reason I bring this up is, in part, this idea emerged from the collaboration with the artist Marco Fusinato, but it was also a response to the Biennale's Monditalia agenda, in which the architects within Monditalia were placed into conversation with a set of performance artists and dancers. And the implicit claim was that somehow architecture would be let's say, the passive agent in relationship to the active space of dance and performance. And much of our project was to try to speak back to that notion of architecture being passive in this space, and that we would do this through the constant interruption and the acoustic assault. And not surprisingly, this produced a long series of negotiations with the Biennale. And so in a way, it performed exactly like it was intended to, which was to use the exhibition installation as a mechanism for interrogating the curatorial agenda of the Biennale. And these are all very recent projects. This is a project in a slightly different vein. It's called D'Este Fashion Collection 1 to 8. It's an exhibition that just closed in Greece recently. And through a complicated story, we were asked to participate in this. And it's a project in which a collector asks artists to survey each year's fashion offerings and to select 5 pieces which would form a capsule collection, and response make a work of art. And so it consists of art projects, fashion pieces, and the way in which they seem to reveal some of the affinities and tensions between art and fashion. And so we were asked to curate this project, but it turns out there's zero curatorial project here, because the material comes pre-curated, as it were, by the artists. And it seemed like all we could do was respond as designers in relation to what seemed to be an absent curatorial project. And so we designed this system in which the art objects and the fashion pieces were divided by a series of apparatuses with 26 kilometers of moving chain that would constantly inscribe that boundary between the art pieces and the fashion pieces, opening up visually and spatially and through forms of movement the relationship between them, And within this, we had to design a kind of display system for the items of clothing, in which we took a standard size 2 mannequin and extracted the key dimensions from neck, shoulders, bust, waist, and hips as elements that would support the pieces. And so we have artists like Charles Ray, Helmut Lang, Jürgen Teller, and here you see some of the movement of that system. And even more familiar people like Diller Scofidio Renfro, who did a project for this exhibition based around the Glass House. And before I break, just one last project quickly. This was an exhibition that we did in Sao Paulo with a film artist, Mark Lewis, who had a project that's a kind of science fiction project, in which the project attempts to imagine a world in which cinema has not yet been invented, but is our moment in time, and all construction of movement is somehow understood through architecture. It's as though we imagined ourselves in the late 19th century, in which we're on the verge of cinematic production, but we see animation in the surfaces of the world around us. And so his project is to try to imagine what happens if we suspend that moment of creation. And so we had to enter into this weird representational formal economy between cinema and architecture, in which the design tried to produce those animation effects. And so there are a series of kaleidoscopic reflective surfaces that don't reproduce very well photographically. And we're inside Oscar Niemeyer's great Biennale building in in Sao Paulo. And I'll stop there, and if we have time to come back to the next set of projects, we'll continue. Thank you.
Okay. Just to finish, I'll give a short presentation. I have to express my gratitude to all these panelists who have worked in 1 week so efficiently. And finally, perhaps it's good to be first in the first session. The point I want to introduce in our conversation is about the transformation that recently we are living in the incorporation to the design process of the information that architects get from another experts. No? So I think from the tradition of architects inventing problems than consultants try to solve, we are now in a culture of sharing knowledge, and this idea of appropriation or transdisciplinary is really enriching a dialogue where the architect has changed the position and is not exactly the director of the team, and all the idea of teamwork, like the only possibility of coming out with a complexity of design of every middle-sized building today means that the role of architect is changing, and the negotiation of this role is one of the important issues we have to deal with now. No? And I want to show two cases very fast. This is also an advance of the lecture I will give here the next week, so I don't want to show too much. But there are two cases about different ways of being an architect. Perhaps the same architect has to perform in very different ways in different situations. No? This is an industrialized small house. It's not a prefab in terms that the idea is not to create something to be repeated or to be produced in a factory or to have it in a catalog. It's really a house that the construction system is not traditional, it's just industrialized. That means that the knowledge to do it, to make it possible, is not something that we as architects usually have. So the work that you can do at your office related to this kind of project is quite limited, and in one moment somebody has to come to incorporate knowledge to this process of construction. No? So this, here we are seeing the installation, but I wanted to, okay, the order is not so this is the site construction. No? So this is the the place where the construction is done. So the work of the architect is more like a reviewer, like a controller and receiver of the information and all the work done by others who finally are trying to make it possible with the instructions, but not necessarily from drawings, no? So this is an interesting case because from a very simple drawings in this warehouse and this workshop, the house was built and transported to the site, as you have seen here, and installed there, and finally built. And 2 months later, when the German magazine Detail asked us for the drawings of the house because they wanted to publish, we discovered that we didn't have them. No? We have just done a very simple drawings, and all the production and the real drawings have been done by others. So this is not like working drawings done by specialized companies. It's really another kind of conversation. So in terms of appropriation and sharing fields and dialogue architecture, I think this is a good example. No? The second case is this architect. No, it's like the architect as experts coordinator. It's related to. No, this is a diagram of all the people taking part in the development of a big project. It's a Congress Center. So you can see there. I don't have how to show you. Okay, you see this? Okay. You can see here like the architect's position that is not central. This is our office. This is part of the local office we need to develop this project. This is the client, and these are all the consultants. There are 4 main topics that everybody has to relate their work to. One is functionality and cost, sustainability, image and communication, and urban regeneration. That means that here you have roughly 100 people, 90 something, all of them with a different speciality, all of them taking part of this multi-level conversation. And the role of the architect is more like the spectator of these conversations. Sometimes have to be in the middle, sometimes have to just step back and let the others to work, you know, and to talk. This is one of the consequences of this project. It's a huge one, and you have seen that one of the 4 topics that's basic ideas of the project and also asked by the client is about sustainability and environmental responsibility. So the experts related to this field started to work with us, and the first intention was to don't have any air conditioning in the building. This is a 75,000 square meters building with different rooms for meetings from 5 to 4,000 people. So that means that we have a room with 4,000 people in this building without any air conditioning machine. We will see, no? But the answer to this question is that if you really want to do this with natural air, you have to move big volumes of this air. That means that the dimensions and proportions of our architecture change absolutely and radically. So you have to accept to have these huge slabs or some other sizes and proportions that usually shouldn't be, or it's very difficult for architects to accept, no? So we have been working for decades to do slabs as thin as possible, our carpenters are invisible, and now if we really want to incorporate the conclusions of all these concerns, there is a new aesthetic, there is a new dimensional composition of the buildings, and you have to also find the solution or find the role in the design process to incorporate them. No? In this case, the conversation between the experts in this moving natural air in the building and the structural designers found it that is good. What is good for one is also good for others. So the structural designers say, okay, I take these huge slabs because I can do interesting structures with that, or we can at the same time don't have any column in the building, which for one of these flexible organizations is quite important. So it's because this conversation between experts that usually don't have the conversation together, and because the architects is in that moment also we done one step back, that this can happen, and this strange proportion of the construction elements can happen. This is the idea of this movement of the air in the building, using the slabs and using the structural elements to do it. No? And this is the consequences in the facade, no? Where, of course, the deepness of these slabs and the size of the glasses and the different programs behind them can ask for different compositions also of the glass and different materiality. That the building finally is the result, is a kind of radiography of its own performance, no? So it's difficult to read this at first gaze, but there is an explanation for all this diversity of situations, because it's related to the design of the technical design coming from inside outside. No? So I think one of the important questions talking about transdisciplinarity associated to the design process is how introduce this idea or this method of working that is asking to architects to open conversations with experts, not only after half designed and asking people to solve the problems we have invented, as I said before, but as starting from the very beginning of the process with a method that can really incorporate to the project some discoveries that only the conversation can create. The idea in this case could be the project itself consists in the selection of all these inputs from other people. We could show some construction details here, quite complex, no? These construction details are the most strong architectural expression of the essence of our buildings, no? But actually, those details are the expression of how architects take all this information from others and create this synthesis or this synthetical expression of the building. That means that the design process itself consists in this selection, no? So everybody has the same information. Every architect can take the same, can work with the same experts, and they will tell him or her exactly the same solutions for the same problems, but the selection is the project, no? So this idea that the project is a consequence of a collection of conversations superimposed, I think is part of this transdisciplinary topic, quite important today. That's all, and I think we can go to the conversation. Thank you very much.
Okay. Very briefly, I think Diana is. We can go to the table. The speakers. No, we are gonna stand because I think we are just gonna make like Diana is gonna make a first question, and we will see if I make another one. But I think the purpose would be that even like either you have questions to each other, or preferably the audience, like the students, also have questions. So as quickly as possible, as quickly as you have a question, please raise your hand, and you'll be part of the conversation.
I think we were quite lucky, and I think most of you picked up on it, that there were sort of there was a common strain beyond the idea of transfer between the three of your topics, and somewhat with Juan's, but there was at least a programmatic statement in each of them, and I would like to call it sort of maybe after iconoclasm. In Ben's case, he stated, "We are not makers, we are ruiners." Hillary says, "We are collecting and gathering after the leftovers." And Mark said something along the lines of, "We are, in his curatorial practice, they are oscillating between myths, narratives, and their undoing." And in the case of, if I was going to sort of rephrase Juan's programmatic statement in these terms, I would say we're trying to reconstruct the practice of architecture as a sort of synthesis between experts. And I was wondering if you could talk about this sort of emerging theme, right, after iconoclasm, picking up after the ruins, vis-a-vis transfers, because I don't necessarily know that there's a connection, but maybe you guys are better equipped to answer this question. Or you can just talk about after iconoclasm.
Well, no, I like this after iconoclastic idea. I think one of the common lines in presentations is related to the disapparition of the blurring of the figure of the architect, who really has to perform with many different aspects and ingredients of the design process, construction process, but also communication and publishing and of architecture. And every day is more difficult to have this perfectly drawn figure, no? So in the case of my presentation, when I'm talking precisely of some other people working with us, but I imagine that many of the other cases, somebody will be there, no? And it's difficult to recognize this strong personality of traditional architects working on this. So that means that transdisciplinary is also related to a kind of mestizo practice or something like that, no?
Yeah, I mean, maybe to add on that, we can recover the response you got, Mark, and Yale, like that's precisely what we were fighting against with our practice, and in the case of EIT. And I find that case interesting in that EIT was precisely trying to move away from the autonomy of art, but also at the same time away from the autonomy of technology, which was a discourse very prevalent at the time, like understanding that technology had its own rules that could be implemented, that we could just like mediate, but never like lead. So I find that case interesting in the case of our conversation, because then it poses the question, what is it that is leading the practice of EIT, and in the end, like, if it's not either the logics of art nor the logics of technology, but something that ends up resulting in something that is mostly talked about in architecture schools, which is like the Osaka Pavilion, like something that is between architecture, environment, installation, which are words that apply to many of the works like that you've shown also, like could be installations, could be described in those terms, but that have not managed to reshape completely what we do in the schools, that are still called architecture schools for the most part, except for Berkeley College for Environmental Design. So I don't know, like, what if you can respond to that, like what's leading the process once we reject any concerns with autonomy, like nor of our technology, architecture, like.
These are such grand
Yeah.
and challenging questions, but I'm totally in love with after iconoclasm, but I'm also worried about it because it sounds a bit like the counter-revolution. It's like suddenly we're here to repair and reconstitute, and I think we would all reject that. Maybe not. I mean, you should hear from my colleagues. It seems more like maybe it is like another mode of iconoclasm, or something iconoclasm in a different through a different set of operations. When I look at Ben's work, it seems like it's despite the statements of earnest contribution that we've heard, which all architects have, there is a real spirit of dismantling in all of these projects, dismantling the singular figure of the architect, dismantling the idea that the rune is somehow not implicit within all of our projects, dismantling the idea that Hillary is so subversive, like contributing architecture, responding to our generation of nihilist professors, and yet we're working through simple terms like tumbling and crashing and falling. Like somehow we're not hearing within that something else. I'm not sure it's iconoclasm, but I think hunting for that term is really fascinating. But the question of what comes after autonomy, I think, is a profound one. I think it's one that we continue to ask as a field, and maybe if there is a generational question to respond to Hillary, it is hunting for all of the obverses to autonomy, and not only through questions of engagement and artistic practice, but hunting for the ways in which architecture is fully engaged politically, socially, and formally, etc. And so it is curious, isn't it? Because you would think EIT, despite its manifest failures, would be a fascinating model for schools of architecture, which is probably why, for the post-counter-revolution generations, it comes back as an interesting icon. So the question would be how to, and this is what I was getting at, let's say you had to do write a history of the Pepsi Pavilion or produce an exhibition, how to both understand why it's such an important reference for those questions of engagement, and yet not turn it into something like a stable icon that can't be dismantled. And I think trying to find a way to both have insights into but not mythologize is something that we all have to work through.
I mean, that also applies to the question of computation that was dealt in the first two talks, because in a way, like Juan, before starting, was telling me, like, if it was right, the emphasis that the talks had on computation, having the two first speakers, was right in that computation might be understood not so much as something that has its own logics, again, autonomous, or if it's just merely a medium, in that in these relationships with other fields of knowledge. And I think the ways in which both of you spoke about computation as a way of relating to historical examples or other fields of knowledge, I think deals more with that interpretation of computation as a medium rather than as a set of autonomous logics. I don't know if...
You mind if I take it? Yeah, no, a medium or a language, or like a way to communicate. I mean, there's definitely this. There's always been this hope that we have, kind of picking up on this 60s context, that computation would be like the Esperanto for disciplines. That it's a common language, an invented common language that runs through all of them. And I don't really mean like code or scripting or anything, but really just a kind of, it's a form of engagement that operates at a like a low level, like mathematics runs through many fields. And to give an example, this piece that we showed called "The Morning Line" by Matthew Ritchie. Initially we were hired. Initially, actually, the brief was create a pavilion for a work by Matthew Ritchie. So it was literally, make a box like for a work that will eventually kind of come in there. And in the same way that we start all of our projects, we ask like, all right, well, Matthew, how do you work? And he's like, well, I draw. We're like, interesting. So how do you draw? It's like, well, with a pen. Like, oh wow, that's amazing. Like what? Like can you draw for us right now? And he would do a drawing, and we'd say, okay, what if we did that, but we help you in how what sort of pen you use and what kind of paper you use, like where you draw it. It's like great. So we developed this system of drawing that would carry gravity, basically, that would carry loads and that would perform structurally. And so once we figured out that was a way of working together, that's a way like an architect can work with an artist. Once we figured, and that came about through like conversations, that's what I mean by computation. It's like, it's a way of breaking things down and forms a kind of common language. And then once that became a language that we understood, we could build this thing together. Yeah.
So maybe we can have questions from the audience. I'm not sure we have.
Do we have
Okay, I can talk about. I could see how people in the audience might one day write their own reaction, much as Hillary has read a reaction to professors and so on. And I think Mark's way of wrapping it up as, all of you are kind of deconstructing or ruining something, or maybe putting it back together in a different way. And I think maybe if I'm just going to take it and react to it now, it would be I would ask you all whether you believe architects contribute something that is solely their own to other fields. It seems that we're always kind of soaking in other fields and either breaking them down or recombining them. And maybe Ben's example proves me wrong, where it seems like that's a 50-50. But what is it that we originally offer or uniquely offer other fields, if anything?
We offer them the ability to build in spatial terms. I mean, I think, and I'm kind of maybe conventionalizing the response, but that's not so easy to do, and there aren't many disciplines that try so hard to make sense of the world around them and turn that into logics of construction. I mean, and I think that's a form of knowledge and a kind of cultural output that painters are interested in, scientists are interested in. Do they Are they able to, is a nanoscientist able to make new materials out of collaborating with an architect? Maybe, but maybe not. But are they able to understand their discipline better by working with an architect? Yeah, I think they do, and they can. I know you're being provocative, which is part of your training as an architect. But I think it's the discipline. It's the reason I feel like we're revisiting kind of old terrain here. This unfolding or peeling is part of how we work as a discipline. The kind of taking in and letting go, and the iconoclastic and post-iconoclastic, that kind of movement is part of what we do. I mean, I think we always are going through this kind of building up and breaking down as a discipline, and plateauing as well. So I think our contributions are, I guess I maybe see it from my own perspective, but the contributions are felt in other disciplines, and they're appreciated and acknowledged, and it's something that I think the last generations of architects, especially over the since the EAT, has been striving to enter other disciplines in a productive capacity, and I will always stand on that line and thump my chest and say, absolutely, we do contribute to other disciplines, and I think we always have.
Is something I think quite important about this comment, and it's related to one of the three topics of today, is this appropriation. No? I think that one of the aspects of this transdisciplinary that we should talk and we should explain is about how architects usually take from another fields references in a quite direct, metaphorical way. And I think that we have to make the distinction between looking at art, looking for references. That's why some artists are favorite of architects, no? Or how some writers are favorite of architects, no? Because they read Invisible Cities of Italo Calvino, and they say, okay, I have a lot of ideas for my project, no? So that kind of appropriation is the weakest. And I think we are not exactly talking about that, no? In that way, perhaps it's true that architecture is always taking, perhaps with some fascination, some references from another fields, no? From science and so from art, or from many others, in a very direct and referential way. Which is completely different than look at the world of art, trying to understand and trying to open a conversation about how we as architects read the city and how art read the city, how we as architects read the political conditions and how art or other fields do that. No? In that case, the interchange and the dialogue between disciplines is really working, and the level of the discussion and the interest towards the same concerns and topics is the exact point of interest for us today. No? Is how same topic is looked from very different disciplines with different approaches and with different intentions, but not necessarily looking for the most obvious reference to compose volume of the building or the elevation of I think that is an important difference. And in that way, I think architecture is an incredible field of observation and inspiration for many other disciplines who are looking at what we do every day. You know?
I don't know, this may be slightly wrong, but I also am thinking always about, in the work, how to continue to return to architecture. And so, for me, your question is a little bit, why, maybe turning it back, and why not saying, is it not more important for architecture or for architects? Because there is such a fragmentation in the discipline in some ways. So I feel like that could be maybe also a kind of recursive questioning, like that we learn from each other should be as important as what is going on in other disciplines, or why I feel, of course I agree with it, but at the same time, shouldn't it be as important about a kind of internal, not navel gazing, but that kind of provocation? Because I think it was, I don't remember who brought it up earlier, but the kind of, Martha, it was you, I think, talking about the kind of discursive or in art, and in some ways architecture also is so fractured. It is almost similar that, we could go to a kind of extreme and say there are all these different sub-disciplines or something like this, or obviously they're practices, but anyway, I don't know. I feel like maybe thinking a little bit about, I think Bjarke recently said I won't try to quote it, but to the effect that it's so important to be involved in the kind of social, that you're making architecture not for architects, but at the same time I don't completely agree with that. Like, I think it is okay to make architecture for architects to some degree, right? I guess it depends what it is.
Because it would also depend on who the architect is you're making it for, and whether the architect is interested in social justice or form. It's not a term that holds together. Frankly, that's why it's fascinating. I feel like the question is a provocation, but a cheap one. It's like you want us to defend the field. We're all here, clearly, and intellectually engaged. Many of us have spent a long time in the field, and so and so it is a good question for you, right? It is a good question for what you think you are going to produce that will have any viability or currency outside. And by outside, I don't mean outside architecture. I mean outside here. And I think it's a profoundly important question to continue asking. But I think, because it's so easy to defend, and it's also easy to attack. And as much as we've talked about really productive exchanges of knowledge from field to field and within precise modes of collaboration, it's also easy to see architecture vilified, misunderstood, and represented as something impenetrable and not autonomous in the sense that we understand it, but let's say removed from the world. And it's fascinating to look at the extra-disciplinary critiques of architecture to see where those miscommunications lie. And that's part of what I was getting at, as much as we've been engaged in all kinds of exchanges with people outside of the field, and scientists as well, some of the work that we didn't show. It becomes a fascinating moment when you recognize that despite the fact that everyone is contributing freely intellectually to the project, you start to recognize boundaries of misrecognition and confusion in which there is a regulation of disciplinary limits. And that's also incredibly interesting to find, because those are the things you want to push against or test. But so your question implies that we're going to continue to find those and try to negotiate around them.
Isn't it easy to see every day more architects implicated in processes were not related to design? So I think the way of thinking of architects and the idea of project is really important for many disciplines. Yeah. No? Perhaps when we say other disciplines are not interested in architecture, they are not interested in buildings. No? But I think architecture is really a super important topic for many other disciplines, and the way many of them use the concept of project is absolutely taken from our field, and they really appreciate the way of thinking and organizing different materials and reconfigure them.
If they only knew more, how much
Yeah.
they could exploit architects. Yes.
That's all hands here.
Yeah.
I think it's interesting to listen to the direct presentation. It seems like it's a kind of moment for us as students to get a glimpse into the kind of nowness of the way each of you are working in your spaces right now at the state of Florida and stuff. Sometimes I feel like at GSAP we're completely obsessed with nowness and with preoccupation always with what's happening now. And I wonder, like, especially in the wake of so many changes or in the process of our discipline changing so much with computation, like how can the course maybe speak to where you might have felt 10 years ago that there was some other numbness or like, what might happen in the future, like not just thinking about the way you practice now, but maybe how was there like maybe some sort of precipice earlier on in your career where something changed, or I don't know. I mean, architects seem to work for really long periods of time. I mean, I just led a career span as an architect for like probably more than 60 years for many people. So it just seems, I don't know, I'm just interested in like thinking about now versus the rest of your workflow.
There was the first hand.
I think we should take a couple in a row. And then
I'm interested in this question because I'm curious to know how you communicate with values. Because this question is not necessarily like as a group of individuals in a profession, how to communicate what architecture is, but perhaps how do you, now that you no longer even have the building details of the building as you experience them, then how do you communicate what you do to others, to clients, to coworkers?
Well, I think that's a question for every of us, no? But I think communication of architecture is it's an old topic. We have seen how architects have done this from always, and really has been an important part of their work. But I think that today communication is not only related to the idea of transmit what you do, is more about establishing these conversations and these dialogues, because we are obliged to participate in all the social permanent dialogue and political arena with our projects and with our methods of working or system of teaching or whatever. So the idea or the question that we have to be permanently explaining what we do, why, and with what was the intention is completely different than in other times, no? Which is not related to the publicity of architecture. It's more related to how we are asked permanently of having this conversation. So that means that we have to open and to break the limits of the discipline, to make understandable what we do out of these small worlds, no? Because one of the things that you can be an architect and you can live all your life into architecture, having conversations with architects, publishing in your own magazines, giving lectures to your own fellows, no? Because architects are incredibly endogamic in that terms, no? I think any other discipline, if in one moment of their life, any important doctor gives a lecture to people who are not doctors, no? Architects, no. It's quite quite strange to have that, to live that situation. So the idea that now we are obliged to break that circle and explain what you do, and to make easy, to perceive is changing our materials, is changing our the drawing skills, our language, the use of images, and it's really a completely new deal that I think schools of architecture are trying to incorporate with all these programs that Colombia has, for example, about all these graphics projects, whatever, is really trying to incorporate this absolutely real situation and true situation that we are part of a wider world. So the question is quite pertinent. The answer about how we do, I think all we do our best, and we have to change. Or I think clearly architecture is changing its systems of transmitting information just to make it more understandable for more people. And in many places, the meetings or discussions or with the locals, with the users, with the different groups of people are really very important. They really can block projects. The people really is having more and more power in that terms.
More questions? Yep.
I have a question about complexity, and first I'd like to ask Mr. Aranda if there's a tendency towards complex spatial geometrical relationships, and why? What is it responding to? And if new technologies of making, such as robots and computation technology, are pushing that, or these simplifications of such complex forms are pushing technologies, and that's for Mr. Aranda. And then I would go to Mr. Herreros, and I would ask if, as you showed, sometimes you don't need complex details, for example, to achieve something. And I would like to ask if sometimes the complexity of programs, functions, or requirements of the project forces you to see it in a complex way in terms of forms or construction, or it doesn't have to. And I would like also to ask Stanford if simplicity sometimes has to be forced to turn into complexity in architecture, or in when would that be?
Order?
Thank you for the question. It's I like all these questions. I feel like they're questions like you guys assume like maybe we really know what we're doing. But I'll give you a little secret here. We might not at every moment in time, but I will say this to answer a question that was asked earlier. I think what's so fascinating about the discipline is it just takes so long to make something. Literally, years. Sometimes things change. In that time. Cultures change. We've had radical shifts in the last 10 years in our culture. That it dawned on us as a practice, like whether this issue of how do you evolve, it becomes really like crucial. Like, do you change? Do you set aside old things and move on to new things? When is it appropriate to do that? when should you just kind of move on from something, or when do you double down? And and we really, I think it's really important to see how other architects have dealt with that issue. And what you do find more often than not is that I think the more successful practitioners out there, like, they stick to one or two things and go with it. And it's a discipline that rewards focus. And so when you ask questions about complexity and the question that you asked, I just would encourage you to just maybe take that issue with a grain of salt and look at it within the context of a practice where where the architect might just be trying to work on one or two things, and I think what you realize is that's enough for a lifetime of work.
Yes, there is a kind of magnification of the complexity sometimes, I think, in our way of talking. When I was referring to complexity in this diagram I showed you before, is the complexity that I'm really concerned about is this collection of chapters growing every day that we have to deal in different projects. So I don't think the final products of architecture, even Ben's configurations, are really complex. They are a collection of very similar pieces. So the complexity is in the middle of the process. In one moment you are really surrounded by that complexity, but domesticated is the process, is the project. So we could say that simplification is the objective, and complexity is the origin. So what is really attractive and which is really, I think, exciting of the idea of afford one of these projects with all these different variables and inputs is to draw this organization of all of them that can be easily transmitted, going again to the question before, and understood and seen and lived as if it was where they are from always. So the complexity of the drawings is not necessarily related to the complexity of the final result. So of course the human body is more complex. And we could resume them in a very single description. So I think that that is part of our discussion. It's an important and interesting part of our discussion about how we control and how we organize that complexity to finally don't necessarily say this is a complex project. It was in one moment, but not necessarily at the end.
Okay, maybe we can close with that. And I mean, the conversation will continue in next sessions. We left some of the speakers with half presentation without.
I insist that you stay.
So it will be continued. And in fact, I think the kinds of questions that were raised by the audience related to the role that this series can have in unpacking what's the culture that we have in the studios and what's that obscurity that might seem from the outside might be unveiled in this series.
Questions from the audience, we don't need to present more.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you.
Thank you very much.
No, because the topic changes quite so. Not at all. I'm only preparing 10 minutes next time.
Yeah, I mean, somehow it went out of control. Like, maybe next week we have to use a timer or something.
we have to.
We also need to turn the lights there on there after, so that just sort of, I think it'll wake them up a little bit more. I usually that's what it makes me feel more.
I mean, it was a difficult conversation.
Yeah, you end up with grand questions because you're four people.
I'm fascinated.
Hey, Mark, do you want to keep this on here? You want to delete it?
Yeah.
Yeah. Looks cool.
Yeah.
I wish we had seen that.
Yeah. I was looking at it in the screen.
Yeah. Hillary. Do you want to delete this? Yeah. It's pretty cool. This was the next one?
Yeah.
With look at that. That's amazing. It's beautiful.
Yeah.
This is so awesome. That model's insane. Did you go to a museum? Did anybody collect it?
Yeah, well, not that one.
Oh, yeah? That's great.
It was great, this project of the streets.
The idea they were going to do more.
Wow. And you have this model at your office?
No, the client has it at an exhibition. It's a museum, isn't it?
Yeah.
Oh, really?
Denver.
In Denver?
It's beautiful. What's you made an aluminum version of that?
Yeah.
Wow. Really? Like cast?